Actually, let's go to Brazil. Just a couple of things before we play this video to bear in mind. One, further news this past week that really laid bare how obvious what's happening with Lula is. Okay, so Lula has been in prison for several months now. They haven't allowed him to run for president, even though he is the lead candidate and a massively successful politician. They put him in jail on the flimsiest of evidence, and they haven't allowed him to speak to the press. This is a country where the guy who stabbed Bolsonaro was granted an interview, I think, within a week of stabbing him. And leaders of drug cartels regularly conduct interviews from prison. They've blocked his ability to speak to the press consistently. Last week, one Supreme Court justice granted him a right to have a newspaper interview, and another one actually revoked it. Again, just proving again and again and again the reality of this being a judicial coup. And this is also coinciding with the Brazilian elite realizing that the traditional center-right austerity politics is not going to win, and they're throwing their support behind Jair Bolsonaro and the fascist in his fascist candidacy. The Brazil's most influential farm lobby has endorsed him, and he is now getting solid support across the Brazilian business sector. And there's reports that workers are both being threatened about voting for a PT Workers' Party, and also illegal bribes and other things to sort of patronize, workers' votes, as well as a lot of double speak on what Bolsonaro's regime would mean in terms of workers' rights. Now, we know that he's advised by Chicago school economists, including someone who was involved in advising Pinochet. We know that there's work to rewrite the Brazilian Constitution, which the Brazilian Constitution in the 1980s is actually quite pro-labor, and a big mission would be to gut labor in that Constitution, and also that the far-right evangelicals are saying that the PT are Satan worshipers, and they're freaked out about the vice presidential candidate, Manuela, who is the head of the Communist Party and would be the vice president under Fernando Haddad. This video with Danny Glover and Mark Weisbrot summarizes, again, not only the judicial coup against Dilma and the absurd imprisonment of Lula, something that, as Noam Chomsky said, does make him, I think it's indisputable, the most sort of prominent political prisoner in the world today, but also the real stakes of a guy like Jair Bolsonaro, who's advocating even more police and military judicial murders in favelas, as an example, in a country that's already overrun with small arms from the United States and a huge amount of murder and violence on the periphery implemented by state security apparatuses. City Councilor Mariela Franco was assassinated several months ago. Her killers have still not, of course, been brought to justice. Let's watch this video.
Brazil has an election on October 7th, and this is a very big election for a number of reasons. This one is a really unusual election because, first of all, the most popular candidate, the former president Lula da Silva, is in jail, and he would have won the election by all the polls if he had been allowed to run.
In the first decade of the 21st century, they reduced poverty, they had a vibrant economy, they extended their relationship with other countries in Latin America.
The Workers' Party was first elected to the presidency with Lula in 2002, and then he was re-elected, and then he could only serve 2 consecutive terms. And so in 2010, one of his ministers, Dilma Rousseff, ran, and she won, and then she won again in 2014. Now that period was a very successful period for social and economic progress in Brazil. And then in 2015, there was a recession, and the right-wing opposition parties to Dilma, who was in office, took advantage of that, and they impeached her. They didn't really have a crime. They accused her of a kind of an accounting manipulation, which all previous presidents had done, and governors too. It was a power grab, but then they still had the problem that Lula could run for president. So with a very politicized judiciary, they went after Lula, and he was convicted of taking a bribe, which was in the form of repairs to an apartment, basically. And they never showed that he owned or stayed in the apartment or rented it, or that it was his in any legal way. They didn't have any material evidence either.
We have to do something about this. But we at the same time understand that this is not only just happening in Brazil, it's being undermined in other countries in the region as well. The question about what has happened to all of these governments in the region who introduced policies that were more friendly to poor people and friendly to indigenous people. What is happening to those particular countries, and certainly those leaders who initiated those really progressive changes.
The leading candidate is this congressman, Jair Bolsonaro. In the press, they compare him to Trump, but to be honest, that's actually unfair to Trump because he is so extremist and so openly racist and misogynist.
Well, that's the nightmare. Basically, what he represents is the same kind of ideology of Donald Trump. He's extremely to the right. He certainly has attacked not only African religions, he's also called for the intervention of the military as well.
You have to remember this country is a relatively new democracy. It's only 30-something years since the dictatorship.
Progressives have to be concerned not only what is happening here in the United States, but also concerned about those who are progressive in other countries in Latin America as well. And certainly Brazil is one of those progressive forces.
So that's all true. And also, the forces are aligning. The elite in Brazil that might have wanted to brand itself as not engaging in coup activities, not repressing the Workers' Party, not having just a pure class resentment-driven, vicious austerity regime, but still wanted to say, no, of course we're not actually embracing of the overtly fascistic politics of a Jair Bolsonaro. They're lining up behind him as the Workers' Party has consolidated behind Fernando Haddad. And even the financial press like Bloomberg depicts Haddad and Workers' Party as somehow sort of outside of the macroeconomic mainstream. Of course, the great irony is that the Workers' Party is a social democratic party governed in an incredibly moderate macroeconomic way while still lifting upwards of 40 million people out of poverty. So that's a very, very big election. And if you're concerned about this sort of global fascist pathogen, Trump, Modi, Orban, you should be very concerned about Bolsonaro in Brazil. There's a lot of people's lives on the line.